A lot of you will have heard about Alastair Humphreys. He's done many sort of slightly crazy and intrepid expeditions around the world, and he's just selected one of his many exploits tonight to talk to us about. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It's a privilege to be here at an event like this. And that first half I thought was absolutely fantastic. I'm slightly daunted having to follow it. James, I've also rowed the Atlantic. I have both arms, both legs. I found it the most miserable, awful experience of my entire life. So I was very, very impressed with that. Andy is just much harder than I will ever be. Robin, I want to be like you when I grow up. And Sean, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for making me not the scruffiest person in the room tonight. So thank you. The Royal Geographical Society here. This is my favourite building in London. I absolutely love it here, and every time I come here, I love it. My adventures began here, really, when I as a student, used to come here to talks and just live vicariously through the crazy people doing these crazy adventures. And I was a student, so I didn't really know what to do with my life. I was vaguely considering joining the army. I was in the OTC at university, and I remember well on a bus once off to some godforsaken place like Sennybridge or something, sitting around, and the RSM, who I was terrified of, coming down the bus, asking everyone what their plans were going to be after university, and everyone was saying things, I'm going to join the Irish Guards or the Light Dragoons and stuff like this. And I was a bit nervous, but I decided to say to him, I'm going to be an adventurer. And he looked at me and he said, that's the best bloody idea I've heard all day, which at the time I took as being a validation of my idea to be an adventurer, but as I've thought about it over the years, I think he might have been referring to a good idea for me not joining the army. So I think, overall, I'm just a bit too scruffy and lazy to join the army, and I decided to go for an easier option of trying to cycle around the world instead. And in places like this, I'd sit here thinking, wow, these are amazing stories, these are amazing, incredible people, I'd love to do something like that, but I'm a massive loser, so I'll never be able to do this. I don't have the talent to go to the South Pole, I don't have the fitness or the skills to do these sort of things, and crucially, I don't have any money, being a student. So I thought these were pretty good reasons not to go off adventuring. But as I gradually thought it over, I realized actually that they were mostly just excuses that I was making in my mind, because it's far easier to just sit here dreaming of these adventures than it was to actually take the risk of getting out the front door and doing something. So I decided to stop being so pathetic, to get on my bike, pedal away from my front door, and see how far I would get. When I set off from home, I really didn't think I was going to get very far at all. I rode from my home down through England, across to France, started riding east across Europe, gradually just getting used to this new life, the life on the road. Through the Middle East, I arrived in Africa, and I was quite daunted here at the prospect of, I was going to try and cycle the whole length of Africa by myself, and I started imagining in my head everything that might go wrong riding a bike on my own through Africa, and I realized that list, with a bit of imagination, could get quite long and scary. So I thought the best thing to do was not to make the list and just trust myself to figure out whatever might happen and just get going. And what was really bothering me at the time was, in Egypt, was Sudan, the next country I was going to ride through, and specifically having to ride across the Nubian desert there. I'd never been to a desert in my life. I'd been to the beach, but that was about the limit of my desert training. And so I was riding along just thinking, what will it be like, what will it be like, getting very, very worried. Well, one day I had to find out. The road ended, the desert began, and so this is officially the end of the road, on into the desert, and I loved it. It really wasn't that hard. It was quite hot. I didn't go very quickly. I was never setting out to go very quickly. When I got tired, I had a rest. When I was feeling miserable, I'd sit down and have a little cry, and little by little, I just made progress across it, and I realized that I was actually doing this. I was making decent progress down Africa and starting to really get into this life. When I started the trip, I did it, I think my original motive was to see the world, but also I wanted to challenge myself physically. Bless you. I wanted to challenge myself physically, to push myself as hard as I could and see how far I could go. But if you ride your bike all day, every day, for many, many hours, you become incredibly fit, and you can then cycle very far. There's no secret to that. There's no skill to it. And so by now I was so fit that I knew I could easily cycle thousands of miles. Don't you start. That actually the physical side of this adventure was not really what was interesting to me anymore. And actually what was far more interesting was that every day I was going to meet this completely random subsection of the 7 billion people who live on our Earth. Every day I was going to be a stranger. I was going to meet new people every day. And just this total random interaction with the human element of the world was definitely the overall highlight of cycling around the world. And the astonishing... the astonishing kindness of strangers around the world. I think that's something that I really try and emphasize, is just how safe and welcome I felt virtually everywhere in the world. So little by little, I made my way down Africa. I was quite constantly on the cusp of giving up and just persuading myself to do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And so the day I saw the first signpost for Cape Town, it's a great moment to see proof that really did exist. And from here, only 730k to go. So I reached the ocean, the end of Africa. And I'm sure some of you, plenty of you have probably been here at Cape Point. I slept there on the beach that night, and it just felt fantastic to have made it all the way through Africa. And it gave me a massive amount of confidence as well. I thought, wow, if I've cycled through Africa, then surely I can cycle the whole way around the world. But then in my weird mind, I then started to think, if I've cycled through Africa, and therefore I know I can get around the rest of the world, what's the point in actually doing it? So I had a bit of a dilemma about whether to carry on or not, but in the end I couldn't think of anything better to do with my life, so I decided just to keep going. And so from here I needed to get over to South America. I didn't want to go in a plane because planes are boring, so instead I hitched a ride on a sailing boat, a much better way to cross the Atlantic Ocean. You might be able to see me, I'm the guy with no suntan even after a whole year in Africa. If any of you are plotting ways to travel around the world after tonight, I strongly recommend yachting. This is definitely the way to do it. So reluctant, I got off that very nice boat, back onto my increasingly battered bicycle, right down at the very bottom of South America, southern Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego, the town of Ushuaia, places that if you've spent time coming to lectures at the RGS and reading travel books, just sort of set your spine tingling, the sound of those words. I thought, wow, here I am. But I also thought, crikey, I've got quite a long way to go. So from there, my plan was to ride north as far as I could to a place called Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic Ocean, northern Alaska. It's a third of the way around the globe, which is quite a long way, but it's logistically at least a very simple thing to do. You just keep the sea on your left-hand side, and you just keep pedaling for about 1.5 years, and then you'll arrive in Alaska. So I rode up through South America, through beautiful landscapes, and just feeling that it's such a privilege to be out there on this journey. I was finding it hard, but also appreciating that it was a privilege to be out there as well. But I was just heading north, north, north. I was obsessed with going north, really. North, up through North America, up into Canada, up into the Yukon, where my route was blocked by a forest fire the size of Wales, an enormous forest fire with only one small road running through the middle of this area. Which is a pretty huge obstacle to deal with. And by this point, I've been going for 3 years at this point. 3 years. And in those 3 years on the road, I think the most common thing, apart from the kindness of people around the world, the other most common thing I came across was people saying no. People's default setting so often when you say you're going to do something slightly out of the ordinary, say, oh, no, can't do that. Oh, it's too far. You better take a bus. Or it's too high. It's too hot. It's too cold. You'll definitely die. There's just this sort of general wimpish negativity to so many people. And by now I was quite good at listening politely to people saying I couldn't do it and then thinking, oh, there must be some sort of way. So I thought I couldn't go by bike. So I had to think, I thought, I know, I'll borrow a canoe. So I borrowed a canoe, popped my bike in the canoe, canoed for 500 miles down the River Yukon till I could get past the fires, back onto my bike, cycle on up into Alaska, hop on another boat across the Pacific. And now all I had to do was cycle from northeastern Siberia, back home again, back up to Yorkshire, for a nice cup of tea. I was going to start in Siberia. I didn't know much about Siberia, except in the wintertime. Obviously, it's very cold. You have to be quite careful about what time of year you arrive there. And I thought my constant mantra in this trip was I didn't want to get old and look back and regret having done a slightly half-assed job of it. So I thought, if I'm going to go to Siberia, I might as well do the job properly. So I turned up in Siberia in the wintertime and spent 3 months cycling through Siberia in the winter, which was about as much fun as it sounds. Down to minus 40. It was a deeply, deeply, deeply miserable experience. And I now look back on it and think, those were the best days of my life. Which I'm sure a lot of you in the room are familiar with that. It's called Type 2 fun, by the way, retrospective pleasures. But I was very glad to get out Siberia, cycle down Japan, across China, heading westward, chasing the sunset. And if you chase the sunset long enough, eventually you'll get back to where you started, back to my front door, home, and I'd done it. Something which completely surprised me, because for the first 2.5 years of this trip, I never thought I was going to make it to the end. By the time I got home, I'd cycled 46,000 miles, which is almost like doing 2 laps of the equator. I was away for 4 years and 3 months, and the whole trip cost £7,000. So it's a pretty cheap way to spend half of your 20s. Since I got back from that trip, I've been doing different sorts of expeditions and writing and talking and stuff. And what I've realized over time is that everyone loves the idea of adventure. I think virtually everyone in the country likes the concept of it, possibly just vicariously, but there's something that people love about it. But most people don't do adventure. And I realized there was this perception of adventurers on the stage doing talks and normal people who just went to listen to talks. That struck me so stupid, because I'm very much a totally normal person, but I just made this choice to start doing not so normal things. So I wanted to try and make a way to just try and make adventure more accessible to anyone. So I decided that to try and make it small and break down the barriers that stop people doing it. And I wanted to show you don't have to go around the world to have an adventure. It can be much smaller than that. It can be a tiny little thing close to home. And so I decided to try and prove that point by doing the most boring adventure I could think of, which was to walk a lap of the M25. So if you can find adventure around the M25, you can find adventure anywhere. And this honestly had all of the ingredients of cycling around the world. It amazed me. It was a physical challenge, which was important to me. I had good doses of misery. Sleeping under a basher next to the motorway in January is rubbish. So that's an important part of most adventures. If you're having fun, you're on holiday, not on an adventure. And I went places I'd never been before. I met interesting people. I met good, kind people. I saw things I'd never seen before. And all of this crammed into this one little week. I got probably the closest I will ever get to being a proper heroic South Pole explorer, hauling this child sledge that we found through the snowy wastelands of Rickmansworth at Junction 17. Sadly, the sledge broke. And this is rush hour on the M25. About 50 metres away from here is the motorway. It's morning rush hour, gridlock, jammed solid, stressed people, frustrated, busy, just all the sort of stuff I don't want in life. And if you take a step away from that, take one small little step away from the road that everyone else is on, you have an entire road to yourself. And it's a beautiful road. It's a more difficult road. There's no signpost there. There's no one to help you, no one to guide you. You've got no idea what's around the next corner. But if you don't really care what's around the next corner, but you're just curious to go find out, then I think this is a good road to walk down for a short while. So this idea of, I call these microadventures, these deliberately, really provocatively small adventures. I started to love this idea and think, right, this is what I want to do. I want to start doing more of these, find get normal people to squeeze adventure into their normal lives. So I went up and I cycled the first stage of the Tour de France. It was a bit too far for me, so I did it over 2 days. Just basic camping gear on the back, a credit card to refuel myself, and bivvying up on the hill that the route went down the bottom there. Just tiny little things like this, weekends, and there's definitely an element of adventure still in there. But even that, I realized, was a bit too big, and what I needed to do is actually make it even smaller. The barriers, the things that stop people doing adventure, a lack of time, a lack of money, a lack of skill, not living in somewhere wild and beautiful. And so I wanted to stop those things being valid excuses and try and find a way around it. And I came up with this idea of, we're so defined by our 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is an important part of our life, and a necessary part of life. But it's also quite a constraining thing for many people. So I decided to flip that around and say, what about your 5 to 9? When you leave work at 5 o'clock-ish, until 9 o'clock the next morning, you are free, 16 hours of daily freedom. Why not try and squeeze some adventure into that? So after work one day, instead of jumping on the train back to home, jump on the train, get out of town, and go climb a hill, and sleep on top of a hill for the night. And if you've never done this sort of thing, then this is a big deal, taking a small little step away from your life, sleep on top of a hill for the night, run back down in the morning, jump in a river, quick swim, back on the train, back to your desk by 9 o'clock. And then when someone in your office says to you, did you do anything interesting last night? Then for once, you have a decent story and don't have to lie. On Tuesday evening, I did a microadventure along the route of the most expensive commute in Britain, which is London to St Albans. And so I decided to try and do that just to show a different way of doing your commute. I haven't got an office, so I pretended that I did, which is the penthouse suite of the Shard, which I left at 5 o'clock. I imagine actually if I had a job that could afford the penthouse suite at the Shard, I wouldn't be leaving at 5 o'clock. But anyway, I left at 5 o'clock. Headed north. It's surprisingly easy to get out of London, to get across the M25, and after the M25, this is the first field north of London. From where we are right now, if you just head that way, any way in a straight line, in 2 hours, you'll be out in wilderness, beauty, find even a nice place for a little evening dip. And then because I was pretending to be a commuter, I did what commuters did, which was to have a Chinese takeaway and an early night but on top of my hill, and then in the morning I could run back down the hill and jump on the most expensive commute in the country from St Albans back into London. You don't have to cycle around the world to have an adventure. The RGS is a fantastic place, and tonight is an incredible example for getting people to think big of adventures. But don't do what I nearly did, which is to think these things are so big that you'll never get around to do it. The hard thing, the most important thing, is to find the first tiny little step you have to take to get yourself in motion. And after that, everything is easy after that. Thank you very much.